Next on Accident Investigator, a young man is run down and severely injured while riding his bike. With few leads to go on, investigators find themselves in a race against the clock to track down the runaway driver.
This case is probably the most disturbing case that I have ever worked with.
Then, when two people are killed in a bizarre crash, reconstructionists are called on to establish if the police have done their job correctly, or if they are in part to blame for the events.
Oh, it looked like a bomb had went off compared to what I had seen before.
And an accident investigator must make sense of mysterious brake marks to explain why a driver failed to stop at an intersection.
I think that there were more things going on than just maybe a trailer not able to brake completely.
Every year, violent collisions kill 3,000 Canadians and injure another 200,000. But there is no such thing as an accident. Every collision has a story, as unique as the people involved. Rusty Haight is a leading authority on accident reconstruction. He trains investigators around the world to read the clues and solve the mysteries.
I'm gonna bet he's gonna land about here. That's my bet.
Here, I'll put your stack of quarters here.
Crashers are like puzzles, and when you've got a crash scene, you've got all the pieces of the puzzle, but you don't know how they go together. It's the accident reconstructionist, the accident analyst's job to put those pieces together. And sometimes you're missing pieces, like, for example, one of the cars involved, as in a hit and run.
It's a beautiful Friday afternoon in a little town. Charlie Newsom is riding along a quiet local road on his way to a nearby restaurant. He's been working there for nearly a year now, and Charlie's never missed a day on the job. Today will be an exception. It's 4 p.m. when accident investigator Weston Brown is called to the scene of a serious hit and run. By the time he arrives, the victim has already been transported to a trauma center. The responding officer informs him that Charlie was unconscious and appeared to be critically injured.
This case seemed, at the time, to be so very disturbing, and as I went on, it became even much more disturbing.
As Detective Brown soon discovers, Charlie Newsom is no stranger to tragedy. At the age of 3, he was in a devastating car accident that killed both his parents and left him with neurological damage and slight autistic tendencies. Adopted and raised by his aunt after the accident, Charlie courageously fought his way through high school and finally received his diploma at age 20. He got his first job the following year, when he was hired as an assistant cook in a restaurant just outside of town.
Charlie had thought of getting a license, but had chosen not to get a driver's license because he didn't feel that he had the faculties to safely operate a motor vehicle, and he didn't want to hurt anyone. And so rather than get a license and drive, which would be the easiest thing to do, he had to ride his bike something like 8 miles each way to work. He chose to do it the hard way.
In a hit-and-run situation, the crash scene is also a crime scene. As a first step, Wes starts collecting as much roadway evidence as possible, but the site isn't offering much information. Then, on the edge of the road, Wes discovers some kind of crack in the asphalt. In one precise spot, it appears to Wes that the crack has been cleaned out, possibly by the bike tire, which would fit inside the crack almost perfectly.
I think what happens is that car strikes the back of that bicycle and it locks up that rear tire. It wipes this crack clean and just takes the dirt and debris out of this crack.
Wes establishes the point of impact to be right there. This tells him that Charlie did not swerve into traffic. The car must have come off the travel portion of the road prior to hitting him.
Always be thinking of what possibilities there are. One of those could be the driver's fallen asleep. Another one could be that the driver's distracted, not paying attention to what's going on, changing the radio, dialing a cell phone. Could this have been an intentional act?
The reason the car left the roadway could have serious ramifications for the driver. But the fact that the person fled the scene automatically makes it a crime. And Wes's immediate priority is to find any clue that will lead him to this individual.
The longer that we go without finding the suspect, the less likely we are to find the suspect or the suspect vehicle.
Okay, for a police accident investigator at the scene of a crash where there's a hit and run, the idea is to get the word out as to what kind of car is missing. So he's going to have to work from evidence at the scene to figure out what kind of car it is, what it might look like, where the damage is. We're going to do an experiment. We're going to see exactly what kind of damage, what kind of evidence on the roadway we can find. That was some crash. All right, assuming we found this car after the hit and run, they tracked him down. The idea is tie this car to this bicycle hit. What we'd be looking for is stuff on the front bumper, some indications here of the tire having been struck. We'll even see print from the tire mark. This is gonna help them identify that this car hit a bicycle. We'd be looking through the hood area and then up into the windshield for some indication of a body, in particular, the body that was hit in this crash. In here's where his head struck. We're gonna find hair, if it's a real person as opposed to the dummy. We may find skin, clothing imprints through here, and bits and pieces off his clothes. We'd look for little teeny threads, and that's gonna tie this guy to this hit and run.
Tiny pieces of glass found on the scene tend to confirm what Wes was already expecting. Just like in the typical car cyclist collision, Charlie's body was thrown up onto the windshield. For the windshield to break, the car needed to be rolling at a minimum speed. But Wes also notes that Charlie and his bike were not found too far from the point of impact. Based on the position of the body and the bike, Wes is then able to estimate the speed of the vehicle.
I did establish the speed range somewhere between 28 and 38 miles an hour.
Having a good idea of the vehicle's speed at the time of impact, Wes is able to theorize on the severity of the car's damage. He puts the word out to dispatch that he's looking for a passenger car with only limited damage to the extreme right front and a smashed windshield. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Charlie's aunt is receiving devastating news. The doctor explains that Charlie's fourth and sixth vertebrae have been crushed, and his spinal cord has been irreparably damaged. The injuries are consistent with Wes Brown's theory of how the crash happened. Charlie's body was thrown onto the car, and his head violently smashed the windshield. His helmet apparently protected him from major head injury, but his neck took the shock. His vertebrae broke on impact, and the resulting damage to the spinal cord cut off most of his nerves from his brain. At age 22, Charlie Newsom will live the rest of his life as a quadriplegic.
Car accidents are a common cause of quadriplegia, and it's oftentimes the most frequent cause that we see in our hospital. Typically, there are injuries to the spinal cord between the 5th and 7th cervical vertebrae, where the spinal cord is either cut or damaged to the point where the nerve signals that are coming from your brain can't go out to your arms and your legs.
After hearing of Charlie's devastating injuries, Detective Brown is more determined than ever to bring this hit-and-run driver to justice.
I learned about Charlie and his disability and the things that he'd been through early on in his life. And I say that because Charlie worked his whole life to be his own man, to be on his own. He just bought his first house on his own with no help from anyone else. And the very thing that he'd worked for all his life, he will never, ever have again. From eating to something as personal as going to the bathroom, Charlie will have to be helped and waited on the rest of his life, which was the very thing that Charlie didn't want.
Coming up, a lucky break leads Detective Brown to a suspect, but will the evidence be enough for a conviction?
Sergeant Morrison contacted me and said, I may have a vehicle here. It matches the description that you gave me.
The victim of a hit and run will spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Now, police are counting on investigator Weston Brown's damage profile of the striking vehicle in order to track down a runaway driver. The following morning, Sergeant Dave Morris is on a routine patrol when he notices a red import sedan traveling about 8 kilometers away from the crash site. He only catches a glimpse of the car, but thinks that he observes some damage to the front of the vehicle. He quickly turns around and runs the license plate number through dispatch. As soon as he learns that the car has an expired registration, he pulls the driver over. The driver is identified as Eric McMahon. He tells the police that he's on his way to an auto glass shop to repair his windshield. But when asked about the cause of the damage, McMahon offers an unlikely story. He insists that the car was attacked by a gang of children throwing eggs and rocks. Sergeant Morris takes a closer look at the windshield and notices a few strands of hair in the upper portion.
Sergeant Morrison contacted me and said, I may have a vehicle here. It matches the description that you gave me. The damage is the same, and there's some hair in the windshield. Can you come out and take a look at it?
Eric McMahon is arrested for an expired registration and driving with a suspended license. Wes also obtains a search warrant for the vehicle, and the car is impounded for further investigation. When Wes enters the garage to inspect McMahon's car, he immediately knows he's on the right track. The front bumper is seriously damaged, and Wes discovers marks consistent with a bike tire on the underpinning of the vehicle. The hair from the windshield also matches Charlie's hair color and length. Wes collects the hair samples for DNA testing.
I'm feeling good that I have the right car. This is the car that's involved in the collision. Now I have to do some interviews and in order to put the driver behind the wheel. The question really is, who was driving that vehicle?
Wes interrogates McMahon, who claims that he has no idea what the police are talking about. He has no knowledge of Charlie's accident at all, and goes so far as to say that he was at home all day the day before. Questioned about the hair, he adds a new line to his story, saying that he now thinks he might have also hit a small deer with his car just the week before.
So I'm feeling very confident that this guy's starting to get caught up in his lies.
Looking for more evidence, Wes obtains a search warrant for McMahon's house.
Good evening. Are you Eric McMahon's mom?
Yes, I am.
The suspect is a university student living with his parents. His mother and little sister are obviously distraught when Wes tells them that Eric has been arrested.
I really kind of felt bad for the family, but you know, a very nice, upper middle class, upstanding mom and dad, still married, good people. They came across at least as very nice people. And here's the police serving a search warrant on their house in this neighborhood.
Wes starts searching McMahon's room for evidence.
One of the things I was looking for was anything that would lead me to the area that Eric was the day before.
And that's exactly what Wes finds. A credit card receipt from a bar situated just a block away from the collision site.
At first, when I looked at it, I just looked in and went, oh, the corner bar, one beer, not that big a deal. And then I looked at the date and I said, hey, that was the day of the collision. And then I looked at the time and I went, oh my gosh, that is the time the collision occurred. That is just before the collision occurred. This is really important. And I was very happy to find that piece because now it leads me down another trail. Now I can go to that bar and contact the people at that bar and talk to them about, hey, do you remember this person? Things like that.
Okay. Was he in here
The bartender tells Wes that Eric McMahon is a regular. On the afternoon of the crash, she distinctly remembers him playing some pool by himself, having only one beer, and heading out alone.
And I had to think to myself, well, geez, here's a guy who's even only had one beer. Why is he just hitting this person, leaving his broken body on the side of the road for this man to die?
Weston can now prove that Eric McMahon was in the area of the crash scene at the exact time of the collision. He can also prove that the damage to McMahon's car matches the victim's injuries and the evidence at the scene. And when the DNA test finally reveals that the hair found on the suspect's windshield belongs to Charlie Newsom, Wes is confident that he can recount the events that led to this devastating hit and run.
The facts are the facts.
On a Friday afternoon, Charlie Newsom is riding his bike to work along the cycling lane of a local road. At the same time, Eric McMahon is on his way home after playing pool in a nearby bar.
We're never able to determine why the car left the road. For whatever reason, maybe he was distracted.
For a reason that remains a mystery, McMahon's vehicle leaves the roadway and strikes Charlie Newsom. Thrown onto the hood, Charlie smashes his head on the windshield. The impact breaks Charlie's neck and hurls him up onto an adjacent lawn. Fully aware of what has happened, Eric McMahon contemplates his next move. To stay and help his victim means to accept responsibility for his actions. Instead, he chooses to flee, leaving Charlie's broken body on the roadside.
Probably one of the most touching moments of this entire case for me was the sentencing. Charlie's aunt was there, and she had a prepared letter that she read to the entire courtroom at sentencing. And one of the sentences in there, and I have the letter here with me, one of the sentences in there was, I did, however, read the entire file to Charlie. We haven't got a whole lot else to do these days. And I asked him if there was anything he would like me to say to the court. And Charlie said no. And this, I believe, was because he had already made excuses for Mr. McMahon's behavior and dismissed them from memory. That is what Charlie does to people who injure him. Still, the court may find it interesting, as I did, that as I was putting the file away, Charlie looked up and said, and Your Honor, this is verbatim, "Boy, I'm sure glad I'm not that guy." As he's laying in his bed, without the use of his hands, without the use of his arms, without the use of his legs, he says, "Boy, I'm sure glad I'm not that guy." I find that pretty moving.
Charlie Newsom never moved to his new house. He still lives with his aunt. Eric McMahon is presently serving a 7-year prison sentence. Coming up, a car crash turns from bad to worse as 2 people are killed and a police officer ends up fighting for his life.
Well, it's no doubt police officers are brothers, and so it gets a little closer to home, and so it's something that you have to swallow a little bit more.
You're driving along and suddenly you find a police car parked in your lane across the road. Lights are on. Of course you slow down, but what else are you supposed to do? Emergency vehicles, particularly police cars, don't stop like that for no reason. They're blocking the lane, something's going on. At the very least, you should stop and see if someone comes out to give you directions. When you do go through, you start out at a real low speed and stay that way till you know it's clear, because you never know what's going to be just around the curve.
After a 9-hour flight, Elliot Dobson is on his way home to his family. Fresh out of med school, he spent the last 15 months in Africa as a volunteer medic. Traveling swiftly on a road he knows well, he's just minutes away from a clean bed, familiar faces, and his mom's home cooking. Then, as he winds around a long curve, a woman appears in the middle of the roadway waving her arms wildly. He sees her just in time to react to the overturned van straddling the lanes in front of him. The woman is hysterical. She explains that she's been in a crash. She's not hurt, but the occupant of the other car has been ejected in the collision. Elliot takes one look at the driver and knows that he's been seriously injured. The man has a wide-open gash on his forehead that is pumping out a lot of blood, and he's complaining of pains in his chest.
Please, there's been an accident over there.
He covers the victim with a blanket to control the man's temperature, applies pressure to his wounds, and reassures him that help is on the way. Matthew Glass is the first police officer to get on the site.
We had to make the scene safe first.
Because the crash occurred just beyond a curve in the road, drivers don't have a lot of time to react to the scene. Officer Glass immediately backs up his cruiser and parks at an angle with the lights flashing to alert approaching traffic.
You want to build a shell around your scene to protect yourselves so you can get in there without worrying about who's coming behind you or who's coming this way, so you can work and do what you've got to do to take care of these people.
Matthew is relieved when he learns that a doctor is already on site. This allows him to relay medical information about the victim to EMS that are already on their way. But Elliot is worried. He knows that traffic crashes are the cause of 55% of paralysis. A few minutes later, veteran accident investigator Mike Barnes is on his way home from work when he notices that the road is blocked ahead of him. By this time, a backup police unit has arrived and an officer is redirecting traffic.
I asked him what was going on. He said he had an accident down the road, and so I decided to go up and see if I could provide some help.
At the scene, Mike immediately recognizes his fellow officer, Matthew Glass. His first question is about the condition of the victims.
He was attending the driver of the van, and Dr. Dobson was attending to him as well. They had stopped the bleeding on his head, and I asked Matt if there was anything else I could do for him.
Matthew asks Mike if he could look after the woman who was also involved in the crash. Betty Reynolds is not injured, but she's still in tears. Her damaged white sedan is parked on the shoulder further down the road. She explains to Mike that she was driving alongside the other car when she dropped her cell phone. She reached down to get it, but before she knew it, a van was skidding out of control in front of her. At some point, the vehicle started to flip over and the driver was thrown out. Once Reynolds regained control of her car, she pulled over and immediately ran to get help.
Anytime you get behind the wheel, there's an alarming number of other drivers around you using their cell phone to send a text message or talk while they're driving. Studies suggest you're 4 times more likely to be involved in an injury crash if you're using your phone and driving. Many states have actually outlawed the use of cell phones, and it's being debated at other states and at the federal level. Should it be outlawed altogether? Still a controversial issue.
As emergency personnel arrive at the scene, an officer approaches to take Betty Reynolds' official statement. Sensing that everything is under control, Mike heads out.
I headed on home. The scene was secured. EMS was on the way, and they did not need me.
But Mike's day is far from over. Just minutes after he leaves the scene, he gets an urgent call from the Traffic Bureau supervisor.
My cell phone rang, and the lieutenant called me and told me about there was an accident at this scene, and I told him that I had just left there. And then he told me he had 2 people dead. Officer Glass was injured. And so then I realized that he was talking about an accident that happened after I had left.
Mike is now asked to handle this case personally. He turns around and rushes back to the site, expecting the worst.
When the lieutenant told me that officers were involved, that heightened my awareness, I think, a little bit more. I had to be honest about that. When we need help, who's going to help us but another cop?
Coming up, Matthew Glass fights for his life as fellow officer Mike Barnes struggles to bring order to a chaotic crash scene.
I just remember seeing shadows, people running, screaming.
After being thrown from his vehicle in a severe car accident, a man now identified as Bill Witherspoon rests in the middle of the roadway. As EMS personnel arrive on the scene, Officer Matthew Glass and Dr. Elliot Dobson are tending to the victim's injuries. Drivers approaching the curve see police car lights flashing and stop. All except for one.
I began to hear people screaming. Can't see anything because at that time I'm looking at the roof of the minivan. And then I just remember hearing the rev of an engine.
Only minutes before, accident investigator Mike Barnes had left a crash scene that had been completely secured and where everything was under control. He quickly realizes why his boss asked him to return.
Oh, it looked like a bomb had went off compared to what I had seen before.
As Mike gets closer to the vehicles, he realizes that the minivan is back on its wheels. The roof is completely destroyed, and pinned beneath the vehicle is the body of Bill Witherspoon.
That van had rolled and then ended up landing on him, and he died because of that. That impact was real severe.
Debris is now scattered over a 90-meter radius. So Mike knows that whatever hit that van kept running on its own momentum.
I could not find the doctor and could not find Officer Glass. So I continued to walk, and when I went around the van, that's when I spotted Officer Glass over in the side of the road, severely injured.
Matthew Glass has also suffered a tremendous blow to his head, and his leg is crushed and mangled.
I just remember seeing shadows, people running, screaming. None of it was with clarity, though. No, it's like I couldn't see details, but I could see people, bodies.
Several meters down the road, in the center of the roadway, Mike notices another body already covered with a blanket. Dr. Elliot Dobson's trip home has come to a tragic end just a few kilometers from his destination. Having just arrived on the scene in response to the first accident, EMS personnel can no longer help Bill Witherspoon or Elliot Dobson. The priority is now to save the life of Officer Matthew Glass.
I know him, I've known him for some time. So I immediately went to him, and so I helped them load him up into the ambulance. I talked to him, assured him that he's being taken care of, and everything was going to be okay.
Although Mike is a professional who knows he has a job to do, he can't help but be concerned about the well-being of his fellow officer.
Well, it's no doubt police officers are brothers. Typically I would show up, it's a job, but now it's someone that I know, and so it gets a little closer to home, and so it's something that you have to swallow a little bit more, but keep your focus on what the job is, and that is to investigate this accident.
Betty Reynolds tells Mike that as she'd been giving her statement to one of the police officers, a black truck came flying into the curve at an incredible rate of speed. It steered left around the police cruiser and then back onto the roadway, speeding up even more as it entered the crash scene. Neither Betty nor the officer saw what happened next, but both agree the impact was like an explosion. The truck ultimately ended its run slamming into Betty's car on the shoulder of the road. Its driver is identified as Jamie Knight.
When I first approached Jamie, he was already talking to an EMS attendant. He was obviously intoxicated. He smelled of alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot. He had some blood on his face, so he was obviously injured though. But he was very combative, uncooperative. So I asked the officer to secure him and to stay with him as the EMS personnel took him to the hospital. My intentions were for the officer to stay with him so we can get a search warrant for his blood and his urine to find out how much alcohol or drugs he may have had in his system.
As the ambulance transports Knight to the hospital, Mike now sets about documenting and exploring his crash scene. As Mike begins his reconstruction of the second crash, he is struck by one thing. There is no trace at all of Jamie Knight trying to avoid the flipped van.
You know, one would expect to see skid marks. They weren't there.
Witness statements support Mike's findings. Nobody can recall seeing the brake lights on Jamie Knight's truck. Instead, they have him going way above the 90km/h speed limit. Considering the momentum needed to send the van flipping back up onto its wheels, Mike makes his own calculations.
We're talking about speeds up to 70 to 90 miles an hour.
As Mike considers the evidence, Knight's blood test results come back from the lab indicating that Knight's alcohol concentration was more than 3 times the legal limit. After 12 hours of on-scene investigation, Mike is finally ready to reconstruct the events leading to this catastrophic collision. After being ejected from his flipped van, Bill Witherspoon lies sprawled in the middle of the roadway. As EMS personnel arrive on the scene, the victim is already being looked after by Officer Glass and Dr. Dobson. Drivers approaching the curve notice the emergency vehicles ahead and stop, but not Jamie Knight.
Jamie Knight was traveling at a high rate of speed. He went around the police car and the front end of his car hit the bottom of the van, causing it to rotate violently, spin, and land on top of Bill Witherspoon. And Matthew Glass tells us that he felt a hand shove his back. It had to be Dr. Dobson saving his life.
In a heroic effort, Elliot Dobson tries to push Matthew Glass to safety, but the full force of Jamie Knight's truck barrels into them.
It caught part of me hitting my leg, and unfortunately caught all of the hood. The hood caught all of him.
He gets hit full force with the front bumper of Jamie Knight's vehicle and gets projected down the roadway. Knight's vehicle continues to travel down the road and crashes into the next object that's in his lane, which is Betty Reynolds' vehicle.
Officer Matthew Glass underwent 5 surgeries to save his leg, including bone grafting and metal rod implants. Matthew has now fully recovered from his injuries, but his life will never be the same.
You know, you feel guilty for celebrating your life, for celebrating surviving when the guy standing beside you died. The man at my feet died and the man beside me died, and I survived, so it wasn't my time, I guess.
At the trial, the medical examiner report reveals that Elliot Dobson suffered a serious head injury and died instantly when Knight's vehicle struck him. The report also suggests that Bill Witherspoon would have survived his injuries from the first accident had he not been crushed to death by his own van as a result of the second crash. With a staggering wealth of incriminating evidence against him, a jury finds Jamie Knight guilty on 2 counts of murder, assault in the first degree, and DUI. He is sentenced to 20 years in prison.
You know, as an accident reconstructionist, we can tell you how the accident happened, but to tell you why someone did something is out of our realm. We cannot get into their head. We can only speculate. And as a police officer, I would speculate that Jamie Knight did not want to get caught by the police because he was intoxicated, so he was going to run. But unfortunately, when he came around the police car, there was the van. He had already made up his mind. He was not going to stop.
Coming up, an accident investigator is mystified by a strange set of skid marks made by a trailer full of cattle.
I hate to use the word mystery, but there was an element here that really needed to be looked into.
Well, they're fresh, but they're gonna go away. Every crash has a story to tell. You heard that in the outset of the show, right? Well, those pages of that story are written out here on the asphalt. Tire marks are like the fingerprints of a given car. But sometimes marks on the roadway can cause more questions than give us answers.
Best part is walk around, all the kids are running.
Ranchers John and Kevin Drake have driven to the regional stock show more times than they can remember. But this year will be different. For the first time in their lives, the 2 brothers will be attending the event without their father, who died of cancer the previous winter.
Remember the time when Dad fell off the horse?
Exchanging fond childhood memories, they tow their stock trailer on what they think will remain a pretty quiet road until they reach their destination. At the same time, Hank Spinner is returning home from work, telling himself the exact same thing. They couldn't be more wrong. When accident investigator Rod Sadler arrives at the crash scene, he learns that he's got 1 dead and 1 seriously injured.
I've learned over the years to separate myself from the personal aspect, not because I'm a person that doesn't care, it's because I have a specific job that I have to do.
On the side of the road, a police officer is looking after Kevin Drake, who has suffered what seems to be a serious head injury during the crash. This is not surprising to Rod, considering the severity of the damage on the Drake's vehicle. But what is surprising is the condition of the unhitched stock trailer. It's only slightly damaged, and the 2 cows still in there appear to be unharmed. Hank Spinner's truck is parked on the other side of the road and has extensive damage to the cab. Although he is severely injured, Kevin Drake is still conscious as officers await the arrival of the paramedics. He keeps asking for his brother. John Drake was not so lucky. Having been seated on the collision side of the vehicle, his body was crushed by the impact of the crash, and he died almost immediately from massive internal injuries.
Well, when I arrive at a scene like that, it's obvious because a death is involved, it's going to affect somebody's family very deeply. And the important thing to me is to help the family through this process because they want to know what happened, why it happened, and how it happened.
By the time the ambulance arrives, Kevin Drake's head has become dangerously swollen. The severity of his head trauma and his state of consciousness indicate that Kevin could have suffered internal cranial bleeding, and the risk of irreversible damage to the brain is very real. If it's the case, time is against him. As the emergency medical technicians lift him inside the ambulance, Kevin manages to tell Rod that he was driving the pickup truck, but has absolutely no recollection of what has just happened. The driver of the other pickup truck is in shock. Hank Spinner only suffered minor injuries, but when Rod asks him about the accident, Spinner does not remember much either. He says he hadn't even realized there was another vehicle coming towards the intersection until he felt a tremendous crash. His own vehicle came to a skidding stop, and only then did he even become aware of the other pickup truck. Rod assesses the scene. He has 2 paved country roads connecting together in a T intersection with a stop sign in the direction the Drakes were traveling.
Well, it's pretty obvious that he didn't brake until he reached the stop sign, which is far too late to be able to stop. He slides into the intersection. See those offset skids there? That's where impact was. The Drakes had to stop, and it was very clear that they were not able to in time. Was it human error? Is there a mechanical problem?
So do you think a little weight behind a car might make a difference in terms of stopping distance? We're gonna find out. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take this cone, we're gonna put it out here on the road. I'm gonna drive the trailer toward the cone at a certain speed. Trailer's gonna be empty. I'm gonna get on the brakes and see how long it takes to stop. Then I'll come back through after we load the trailer. I'll drive the same speed and try to brake from the same point. See if it doesn't take a lot longer to stop, more distant. Let's try that experiment. So that works out to be about 20% longer in this case. Now, here's the deal. If you don't allow for enough space in front of you, when you're towing a heavy load, you could be 20% further into the car ahead of you.
Then, an odd-looking set of skid marks suddenly catch Rod's eye. Just behind the pickup truck set of skids are what reconstructionists call skip skids.
See these skids here? They're almost like a dotted line.
Such intermittent marks are usually made by a trailer bouncing along the road with its brakes locked. It can be the result of bumps, potholes, or other irregularities in the roadway surface.
I don't think that in this particular instance, the trailer bouncing was a factor. And the reason that I came to that conclusion is the beef on board was extremely heavy. So I knew there was I hate to use the word mystery, but there was an element here that really needed to be looked into because I think that there were more things going on than just maybe a trailer not able to brake completely.
Coming up, suspect wires found at the mechanical inspection of the trailer put Rod's investigation on an unexpected trail.
What caught my eye was there was 2 new wires running along the trailer that looked out of place.
tragic crash has caused the death of a young rancher and left his brother battling for his life. Accident investigator Rod Sadler is struggling to determine exactly why the pickup truck failed to stop at the intersection. And he's mystified by an uncommon type of skid mark originating about 27 meters behind the point of impact. But the morning after the crash, Rod is faced with what is by far the worst part of his job, interviewing John and Kevin Drake's mother.
In this particular case, it was really difficult because Mrs. Drake had already lost one son. Her other son was suffering critical injuries, possibly fatal injuries. She had so many things going through her mind.
But despite her grief, Mrs. Drake desperately wants an explanation for the crash.
She was willing to speak with me. She answered what questions that she could.
She informs Rod that her sons were on their way to the stock show. They'd set off about 2 p.m. for a 4-hour ride. It was a regular trip for them, so it was a route they both knew well, and they were both accustomed to driving with cattle trailers. This information would seem to cast doubt on the possibility that the brothers may have missed the stop sign or gotten confused at the intersection. The mechanical examination of the pickup truck also shows that the brakes were in perfect condition. This rules out the brake failure scenario. But it's noted that the trailer's electric connector to the truck is old and full of rust. The wires are so frayed that the trailer mechanic suspects that electric signals from the truck would possibly not even be transmitted to the trailer. This would mean that the turn signals, the brake signal, and even the electric brakes on the trailer may not have been triggered when the corresponding devices were activated on the pickup truck.
What caught my eye was there was 2 new wires running along the trailer that looked out of place. They really caught my eye. They looked like they didn't belong there.
Following the suspect wires, Rod notices that they had been connected directly to the trailer's electric brakes.
And if they receive power from another
Based on this observation, Rod develops an amazing theory. In an attempt to bypass the rusted-out trailer plug, could the Drakes have simply failed to properly wire the brakes?
and plug it into an identical plug.
Rod recreates the scenario he has in mind. He connects the trailer's brakes to the pin receiving power from the right turn signal, instead of the one corresponding to the pickup truck's brakes.
Would you spin that wheel for me?
Might such a mistake have caused the trailer's brakes to lock and drag just before reaching the intersection, pulling Kevin's attention away from the stop sign?
Let's see what happens when I turn on the right turn signal. So when I turned on the right turn signal, the brakes locked intermittently. I knew from Mrs. Drake that her sons had to turn to the right to go to the stock show. I figured that this was a very important piece of information in our investigation.
After his accident, Kevin Drake spends 4 days at the hospital under intensive observation. But 48 hours after the crash, he has recovered enough to be interviewed by Rod.
Hi, Mrs. Drake.
Kevin wasn't able to recall much about the crash, but what he could recall was that the day before the crash, they had had some problems with the wiring on the trailer, and that they hardwired the trailer brakes directly into the truck's plug. This really reinforced my theory about the brakes being wired wrong.
This testimony is the final piece of the puzzle, and after nearly a month-long investigation, Rod is able to replay the chain of events that led to Kevin and John's tragic accident. On a Sunday afternoon, Kevin and John Drake set off for their regular 4-hour drive to the stock show. On a road he knows well, about 30 meters before a crossing, Kevin indicates his intention to turn right. But because of a badly wired attachment between the truck and the trailer, every time the right turn signal on the truck flashes, the trailer brakes activate on and off, leaving intermittent marks on the asphalt.
Suddenly there's something dragging on his pickup truck intermittently, and he's focusing on that rather than what's ahead of him. Because of that, he loses his focus, he refocuses, and suddenly he realizes that he's too close to the stop sign. He locks up his brakes. By that time, it's too late.
Kevin Drake completely recovered from his head injury. But like many people involved in a crash, he might never recover a clear memory of the events leading to the accident that cost his brother's life. In this case, no charges were ever brought against Kevin Drake.
Sometimes it's just a little detail that makes the difference between being involved in a fatal crash and getting on with the rest of your life. You drop your phone on the floor, you leave it there. You got a problem with your wiring, you get a professional to fix it. There aren't accidents, they're collisions. Little common sense goes a long way in keeping us all safe on the road.